My husband stared at my 16-year-old daughter and told her, flatly, "You need to move out because this house is mine right now." He stood in my living room, the man I'd married, and told my 16-year-old daughter to get out of her own home. That was the moment I realized the man I loved was a monster, and I had to choose between him and the child I vowed to protect. The late afternoon sun, usually a comforting presence, streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent witnesses. The house, once filled with the warmth of our new family, now held a suffocating tension, thick and cold. An eerie quiet settled, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart. I'm Emily, and I married Mark 2 years ago after 3 years of dating. He knew from the very beginning that I had a daughter, Chloe, from my first marriage. She was 13 when we started dating, and just 14 when Mark proposed. He was wonderful then. He'd say all the right things, how much he loved Chloe like his own, how he couldn't wait to be a real family. I believed him. I wanted to believe him so badly. My first husband had left when Chloe was 4, and I'd been raising her alone ever since. The idea of having a partner, a true partner, who wanted to be part of our little family, it felt like a dream come true. Our wedding was small, intimate, at a beautiful vineyard. Chloe was my maid of honor. She even gave a toast, her voice clear and sweet, about how happy she was that her mom had finally found someone who made her smile again. Mark actually cried during her speech. I genuinely believed those tears were real. After the wedding, Mark moved into the house I'd owned for 12 years. It was the house where I'd raised Chloe, the home my grandmother had left me. There was no mortgage, and I handled the property taxes. Mark would pay for groceries sometimes, cover the cable bill, and act like those small contributions made us equal partners in the household. I didn't mind. I loved him, and I thought we were building a life together, a real life. The problem started subtly. He complained that Chloe was too loud when her friends came over. He'd sigh dramatically about how long she took in the bathroom in the mornings. Then came the comments about teenagers eating too much, how the grocery bill had skyrocketed since he moved in. I'd gently remind him that Chloe had lived here her entire life, that this was her home, and she wasn't going anywhere. He'd nod, say he understood, and then a week later, the same complaints would surface. A slow, insidious drip. When Chloe turned 15, his passive aggression sharpened into outright pressure. He started suggesting she was old enough to get a job, pay for her own things. I argued that she was a sophomore in high school, and her job was to focus on her grades. He'd accuse me of coddling her, insisting she needed to learn responsibility. I shot back that she was responsible, and he needed to back off. He didn't back off. He started making comments directly to Chloe. "When are you planning to move out, Chloe?" he'd ask, casual as if inquiring about the weather. Most kids your age are already thinking about their futures. He'd tell her his parents kicked him out at 17, and it was the best thing that ever happened to him. Each word was a barb, designed to sting. My vibrant, chatty daughter began to retreat. She spent more and more time in her room, a self-imposed exile. She stopped coming downstairs for family dinners, avoiding the tension, avoiding him. She even stopped talking to me about her day, afraid of running into him in the kitchen, of having to endure another one of his cutting remarks. I watched, helpless, as my bright, happy girl dwindled into someone quiet, anxious, and deeply unhappy. I blamed myself. How had I not seen it? Then, last month, everything shattered. Chloe was in the living room, curled up on the couch doing her homework, when Mark came home from work. He walked in, saw her, and something in his face just snapped. He told her to go to her room, that he wanted to watch TV. Chloe, startled, said she was almost done with her assignment, just needed 10 more minutes. His response was chilling. "This is my house, and I don't need to negotiate with a child." Chloe looked at me, standing frozen in the doorway. Her eyes were wide, pleading. I stepped forward, my voice surprisingly steady. "Mark, Chloe can finish her homework. You can watch TV in the bedroom." He turned to me, his face contorted. "I'm tired of tiptoeing around a kid who isn't even mine," he snarled. "I've been patient for 2 years, and I'm done pretending." He then looked back at Chloe, his gaze hard as stone. You need to find somewhere else to live, Chloe. Because this is my house now. Chloe's face crumpled. It was like watching a flower wilt in slow motion. She grabbed her books, tears already streaming, and bolted upstairs. I heard her door slam, the sound echoing through the sudden, awful silence. I stood there, staring at the man I'd married, and realized I didn't recognize him at all. "What makes you think this is your house, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We're married," he sneered. "Everything that's yours is mine." That was my turning point. The rage, cold and clear, finally found its voice. "Did you read the prenup you signed before our wedding?" I demanded. His smug expression faltered. I reminded him, my voice rising with every word, that my grandmother's house was protected as separate property, and he had no legal claim to it whatsoever. He blustered, "Prenups can be challenged." I challenged back, "You're welcome to try, but you should probably talk to a lawyer first, because you might be surprised by what you agreed to." Then I delivered the blow. "You have 30 days, Mark. 30 days to find somewhere else to live." He laughed, a hollow, disbelieving sound. "You can't kick me out of my own home." I repeated, louder this time, "It's not your home, Mark. It never has been." He accused me of bluffing, convinced I'd never choose a teenager over my husband. "That teenager," I said, my voice trembling with fury, "is my daughter. And I will choose her over anyone in the world, including you." He didn't believe me. He went to bed that night like nothing had happened, expecting me to calm down, to change my mind, to realize I needed him. But I didn't sleep in our bed. I slept on an air mattress in Chloe's room, a silent vow to her that I was on her side. The very next morning, while Mark was at work, I called a locksmith. By 2 p.m., all the locks were changed. 3 new keys lay in my palm. The locksmith drove away, and my phone started ringing. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Declined. A third time, and I silenced my phone completely. By 4 p.m., he had called 37 times. I know, because I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, watching the call log. Each voicemail was longer, angrier. The first few were confused, asking why his key wasn't working. Then they morphed into demands. "Stop playing games, Emily. Let me into my house." By message 20, he was screaming, threatening to call the police if I didn't open the door immediately. I saved every single message. I created a new folder on my computer, labeled documentation, and backed up those voicemails to 3 different locations. Then I sent him a single text: "You can collect your work clothes from the porch. You are not coming inside." He called again. I didn't answer. Chloe came downstairs around 5 p.m., her face pale. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. "The locks are changed," I told her, my voice hoarse. "And your stepfather knows it." She just nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, and went back upstairs. At 7 p.m., a car door slammed in the driveway. Heavy footsteps crunched across the porch. Then the pounding started. Mark's fist slammed against the front door so hard the frame shook. He was yelling my name, demanding to be let in, calling me crazy and unreasonable, insisting he just wanted to talk. The pounding intensified, punctuated by 2 furious kicks. I heard him swearing, then his voice got closer to the door, as if he was pressing his face against it. "You can't do this to me. I live here. You'll regret making me look like a fool." Chloe appeared in my bedroom doorway, her face ghostly white, hands shaking. I pulled her inside, closing the door firmly behind us. We sat on my bed, huddled together, listening to him rage. He pounded and yelled for 20 agonizing minutes. Then silence. A car engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel as he peeled out of the driveway. Chloe remained frozen on the edge of my bed, long after the sound of his car had completely faded. Then she looked at me, tears welling in her eyes, her voice cracking as she asked, Did you really mean what you said? About choosing me over anyone?" I pulled her into my arms. Her whole body was shaking against mine. "You have been my priority since the day you were born, Chloe," I whispered, tears finally escaping my own eyes. "And I am so sorry it took me this long to prove it." She started to sob then, not the quiet, hidden tears she'd been holding back for months, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that racked her entire body. I held her tight, letting her cry it all out. "I should have seen it sooner," I murmured into her hair. She cried for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 15 minutes. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy, her eyes red, but she looked lighter, unburdened. We stayed up talking until past midnight. She told me about all the small cruelties I hadn't noticed. How he'd sigh dramatically every time she spoke at dinner. How he'd forget to save her leftovers when I worked late, even though he always saved some for himself. How he'd deliberately turn the TV volume up when she was trying to study in the living room. How he'd make those cutting comments about her eating too much, taking too long in the bathroom, leaving her things around his house. Every story she shared made my chest ache with a fresh wave of guilt and fury. I kept apologizing, and she kept saying it wasn't my fault, but we both knew I should have protected her better. Over the next 3 days, Mark switched tactics entirely. The angry calls stopped. Instead, long, carefully worded paragraphs started arriving via text. He'd overreacted, he loved our family, he was willing to go to counseling. Chloe had misunderstood his intentions, he was just trying to teach her responsibility, like any good parent would. He'd been stressed at work and took it out on us, but he was going to do better. He promised we could work through this if I just gave him a chance. Each message was calculated, reasonable sounding. I read them, and suddenly, the pattern I'd missed for 2 years became blindingly clear. The way he was rewriting history, casting himself as the victim of misunderstanding instead of the man who told a teenager to leave her own home. The way he reframed his cruelty as tough love. The way he tried to make my protection of Chloe sound like an overreaction. I responded once. One sentence. The 30-day notice stands. All further communication needs to be in writing through lawyers. He called immediately. I didn't answer. 5 more texts followed, each progressively less reasonable. I saved them all in my documentation folder. My friend, Jessica, had recommended a family law attorney named Eleanor Vance. I called her office first thing Monday morning. Her receptionist, kind and efficient, squeezed me in for Thursday afternoon. Eleanor's office was in a beautifully converted downtown house, all gleaming hardwood floors and bookshelves overflowing with legal tomes. She was perhaps 50, with severe gray hair pulled back in a bun and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I sat across her polished desk and handed her a copy of my prenup. She read through it meticulously. I tried not to fidget. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up, her expression calm. Your house is completely protected as separate property, Emily. Your husband has no legal claim to it whatsoever. The wave of relief that washed over me was so profound, it made my hands tremble. She walked me through the separation and divorce process, step by step. She warned me that Mark would likely escalate once he realized I was serious. She asked if he'd ever been violent. I said no, but he'd been emotionally abusive to Chloe. She helped me start documenting everything for a potential restraining order. When I walked out of her office an hour later, I was still scared, but for the first time in 2 years, I felt clear-headed. Mark refused to look for a new place. He refused to pack his belongings, acting as if the 30-day notice was just a dramatic phase, and I'd come to my senses any day now. He was staying at his friend Steve's house, but he kept showing up at random times, trying to talk sense into me. On day 12, I was making lunch when I heard a key in the lock. My blood ran cold before I remembered the new locks. The door handle rattled. Then, Mark's face appeared at the kitchen window. Chloe was sitting at the table, doing homework. She froze. He tapped on the glass, gesturing for me to let him in. I shook my head, my jaw tight. He started talking through the glass, his voice muffled but his words clearly audible. Teenagers need tough love, Emily. Structure. You're doing Chloe a disservice by coddling her. I walked over, deliberately placing myself between the window and Chloe. Leave, Mark, I said, my voice low but firm. Something in my tone must have cut through, because he actually stopped. He stared at me for a long, silent moment, then turned and walked back to his car without another word. That evening, my mother, Susan, called. Mark had contacted her, claiming I'd had some kind of breakdown and kicked him out for no reason. She suggested marriage counseling, reminded me how hard it was to be a single parent, how lonely I'd been before him. The old guilt, the old fear of being alone, began to creep in. Maybe I was overreacting? Maybe I was making a terrible mistake? Then I remembered Chloe's crumpled face when he told her to leave. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you don't have all the information. I need you to trust my judgment on this." She went quiet for a moment. "I hope you know what you're doing, Emily," she finally said, then hung up. The conversation left me shaky and uncertain. I called Jessica, who reminded me that my mother hadn't seen what I'd seen, hadn't known how Chloe had been suffering. Her words were a lifeline. Eleanor had assigned a paralegal, Sam, to help with my case. He called the following week, suggesting we understand Mark's financial situation better. "It might explain why he's fighting so hard to stay in your house," Sam said. I met Sam at a coffee shop near the courthouse. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with glasses and a laptop covered in legal aid stickers. He pulled up credit reports and bank statements he'd obtained through discovery requests. What he showed me made everything click into place. Mark had been living beyond his means for years. Over $40,000 in credit card debt. Car payments on a truck he couldn't afford. Personal loans to cover other loans. His salary was decent, but nowhere near enough to support that lifestyle and pay rent. My house, my grandmother's house, had been subsidizing his entire existence. I had been providing free housing while he spent every dime on himself. The discovery was both vindicating and sickening. It solidified the betrayal. He might have proposed partly because marrying me solved his money problems. Sam printed everything out for me. It went straight into my documentation folder. 2 days later, I received a call from Chloe's school. Dr. Anya Sharma, the counselor, had a gentle but concerned voice. Chloe had broken down crying during a college planning session. When asked about her home life, Dr. Sharma said she wished someone had reached out sooner, as Chloe had been showing signs of anxiety and depression all semester. My guilt crashed over me so hard, I had to sit down. I'd been so focused on making my marriage work that I'd missed my own daughter falling apart right in front of me. Dr. Sharma reassured me that recognizing the problem and taking action was what mattered now. She said Chloe had mentioned things were better at home recently and seemed relieved. It helped a little, but the weight of my failure still pressed down on me. On day 31, I came home from work at 5:30 p.m. Chloe had volleyball practice until 6 o'clock, so the house should have been empty. But when I opened the door, I heard the TV on in the living room. Mark was sitting on the couch, feet up on my coffee table, as if he owned the place. My heart started racing. He looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. "I still had a key, Emily. So technically, I'm not trespassing." I knew then he must have made a copy before I changed the locks. "You've had your tantrum," he continued, his voice calm but his eyes hard. "Now we need to talk like adults about our marriage." I didn't say anything. I just turned around, walked back out to my car, and called Chloe. "Go to Jessica's after practice," I told her. Then, from my car, I called the police and reported that my separated husband had broken into my home. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. I waited in my car. They went inside, and I heard raised voices. 10 minutes later, Mark emerged, the officers close behind him. He shot me a venomous glare as he walked past my car. One of the officers came over and took my statement, then asked if I wanted to press charges. "Yes," I said, my voice unwavering. She gave me a case number and advised me to contact my lawyer about a restraining order. After they left, I sat in my driveway for another hour before I felt steady enough to go inside. The next morning, I called Eleanor. "I was expecting this," she said calmly. We filed for a restraining order that afternoon. The court hearing was scheduled for 5 days later. Eleanor spent 3 hours preparing me, making me write down every threatening message, every boundary violation. Every time Chloe had felt unsafe in her own home. Putting it all in writing made the pattern impossible to deny, but I was terrified the judge wouldn't take it seriously because Mark had never actually hit anyone. Eleanor assured me that emotional abuse and harassment were valid grounds for protection orders, and that judges were becoming more adept at recognizing patterns of control and intimidation. I wanted to believe her, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I signed the paperwork. The restraining order paperwork sat in my email inbox for 2 days before Mark found out about it. I don't know how he got the information so fast. Perhaps he was checking court records, or his lawyer told him. Within hours of the filing becoming public, my phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't talked to in months. The first came from Brenda, a friend from my book club. A long text about how shocked she was, how she always thought we were such a happy couple. She asked if we could talk, because she wanted to understand my side of things. I called her that evening, trying to explain the situation without going into too much detail about Chloe's pain. Brenda kept interrupting, saying marriage is hard, that everyone goes through rough patches. She said her own husband had said harsh things over the years, but they worked through it. It hit me then. She wasn't listening. She had already decided I was overreacting before she even picked up the phone. 2 more friends reached out over the next week with similar messages. They'd talked to Mark or heard his version from someone else and wanted to know why I was being so extreme. One of them actually used the word vindictive, asking why I was trying to keep him away from his stepdaughter. I stopped responding after that. Anything I said would be twisted and shared with people who had already made up their minds. My brother, Daniel, called on a Thursday night after hearing about the restraining order through Mom. He didn't ask for my side of the story. He didn't question my decisions. He just said, "I'm proud of you, Em, for protecting Chloe." I've been worried about Mark for a while. I asked him what he meant, and he said he'd noticed little things at family gatherings. The way Mark would make subtly demeaning comments about Chloe's appearance, her friends, her grades. Daniel said he'd almost said something a few times, but didn't want to overstep. I told him I wished he had. He reminded me that I probably wouldn't have listened back then, because I was still trying to make the marriage work. He was right. Daniel finished by saying, "Anyone who sides with him without asking questions isn't really your friend anyway, Em. Real friends trust your judgment and support your choices, even when they don't understand all the details." That conversation helped more than he probably knew. I was starting to feel like I was the problem. Losing those friendships hurt in a way I didn't expect. These were people I'd shared meals with, confided in, celebrated holidays alongside. Now they were treating me like I'd done something wrong by protecting my daughter. I kept thinking about all the times I'd supported them through their own problems without questioning their decisions. The double standard made me angry, but it also made me sad because it showed me how little they truly knew me. Chloe came into my room one night, about a week after the restraining order was filed. It was late, almost 11, and I was lying in bed, staring at my phone, trying to decide whether to respond to another concerned message. She knocked softly and asked if she could come in. "Of course," I said, putting my phone down. She sat on the edge of my bed, picking at the comforter for a minute without speaking. Then she looked at me, her young eyes filled with a pain I hadn't seen, and said she needed to tell me something she'd never told anyone before. My stomach dropped. I knew whatever came next was going to be bad. She started talking about the last 2 years, about all the things Mark had done when I wasn't around. He told her she was the reason we couldn't take vacations, because she cost too much money. He said it multiple times, always when I was at work or running errands. He'd bring up how much cheaper life would be without a teenager in the house. Chloe said she started feeling guilty every time I bought her new clothes or school supplies, because she knew he was keeping track of every dollar spent on her. She told me about the nights when I worked late and Mark would make dinner for himself, but forget to save her any. She'd come downstairs, hungry, to find him eating on the couch, and when she asked about leftovers, he'd act surprised, saying he thought she'd already eaten. It happened enough times that she started keeping granola bars in her room so she wouldn't have to ask him for food. She described the way he'd sigh whenever she spoke at the dinner table, that long, dramatic exhale, as if listening to her was physically painful. He did it so consistently that she stopped talking during meals unless I asked her a direct question. She thought maybe she was being too sensitive until she noticed he never sighed when I was talking. Only when she was. The full, horrifying picture of his calculated campaign to make her feel unwelcome in her own home broke something inside me. These weren't just moments of frustration or adjustment struggles like I'd told myself. This was deliberate and sustained emotional cruelty, designed to push a child out of her own house. I apologized to Chloe, tears streaming down my face, for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting her the way I should have. She said it wasn't my fault, because he was careful to only do these things when I wasn't watching. Then came the admission that twisted my gut. She didn't tell me because she was afraid I'd choose him over her. That hurt worse than anything else, knowing my daughter had been living with that fear for 2 years. I pulled her into a fierce hug, promising her, I will always choose you. There is no universe where I would pick anyone over my own child. We stayed up talking until almost 2 a.m. She told me more stories, each one making me want to go back in time and kick Mark out the day he first made her feel small. The restraining order hearing was at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Eleanor met me outside the courthouse at 8:30 to go over everything one last time, reminding me to stay calm and stick to the facts, no matter what Mark said or how he tried to twist things. We walked through security and found seats in the hallway. Mark showed up 15 minutes later, wearing a suit I'd never seen before, probably borrowed or bought specifically for this. He looked perfectly reasonable, calm, like a concerned spouse who just wanted to work things out. His lawyer, a woman in her 50s, kept glancing at me with an almost sympathetic expression. When our case was called, we filed into the courtroom and took our seats. The judge, a man in his 60s with reading glasses perpetually pushed up his nose, reviewed the paperwork in silence. Then he started asking Mark questions about the incident where he'd entered the house after being told to stay away. Mark's voice was steady, polite. He explained he just wanted to talk to his wife like adults. He claimed he didn't realize using a key he'd had made months ago would be considered breaking in. The judge then asked about the 30-day notice to vacate and whether he understood the house belonged to me as separate property. Mark's mask slipped a little. He referred to my house as our marital home and said marriage means sharing everything. Eleanor had warned me this would happen, that his sense of entitlement would bleed through. The judge pressed him, "Why did you believe you had a right to enter a home you'd been explicitly told to leave?" Mark started to backtrack, but then pivoted. He claimed he was just trying to prepare his stepdaughter for the real world and that I was being overprotective. He called Chloe difficult and disrespectful, insisting she needed to learn that life had consequences and I was doing her a disservice by coddling her. The judge's expression hardened when Mark started talking about Chloe. He asked Mark to clarify what he meant by preparing a 16-year-old for the real world by telling her to find somewhere else to live. Mark stammered, tried to backtrack again, but the damage was done. His entitlement was out in the open for everyone to see. The judge granted a 6-month restraining order, ordering Mark to stay away from both me and Chloe. He stated clearly that any violation would result in immediate arrest. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Eleanor squeezed my arm. That went as well as we could have hoped. Mark and his lawyer left through a different exit. I didn't see him again that day. The next problem arose when I tried to take Mark's name off the utility accounts. I'd assumed it would be simple, since the accounts were originally in my name and the house was my property. But when I called the electric company, they told me they needed both signatures to remove an authorized user. I explained we were separated and he'd been ordered to stay away. The representative was sympathetic but firm. Company policy required both signatures. I asked for a supervisor, who repeated the same policy. I spent 3 hours on the phone that day, getting nowhere. Sam, my paralegal, helped me figure out a workaround. He drafted an affidavit stating I was the sole property owner and that Mark had added his name to the accounts without my permission. We attached copies of the deed, the prenup, and the restraining order. Then Sam called the utility companies himself, working his way up the chain until he found someone willing to review the documentation. It took 3 weeks of frustrating phone calls and multiple rounds of paperwork. The electric company finally removed his name after 2 weeks. The water company took longer. Every time I thought we'd cleared the last hurdle, another requirement would pop up. Mark, out of pure spite, refused to cooperate, ignoring calls from the utility companies and refusing to sign anything his lawyer sent over. He was leaving bills in limbo, hoping it would force me to contact him directly. Sam warned me not to take the bait. Mark was looking for any excuse to claim I'd violated the restraining order or to reestablish communication. Eventually, we got everything straightened out. I reclaimed full control of my household utilities and changed all the account numbers so Mark couldn't access any information about my usage or billing. 2 weeks after the restraining order hearing, Eleanor called with unexpected news. Mark's lawyer had contacted her to say they were accepting the divorce terms without contest. I asked if it was about the divorce, and she said, "Not exactly." She read it to me over the phone. The letter proposed we pause the divorce proceedings and try separation counseling instead. It was full of therapy jargon about communication breakdowns and blended family challenges, stressing the importance of working through difficulties rather than giving up on a marriage. It suggested that with professional help, we could find better ways to address our different parenting styles. The letter completely ignored everything Mark had done to Chloe. It reframed his emotional abuse as a parenting disagreement. It made the whole situation sound like a misunderstanding that could be fixed with better communication. Eleanor said this was a common tactic to delay proceedings and maintain control. She'd seen it dozens of times. The goal was to make me feel guilty for not trying hard enough and to buy Mark more time. She asked if I wanted to consider the proposal. "Absolutely not," I said. I instructed her to proceed with the divorce filing immediately. She said she'd have the papers ready by the end of the week. True to her word, she served him the following week. I got a text from Eleanor on a Wednesday afternoon. The process server had delivered the papers to Mark at his work. A strange mix of emotions swirled inside me. Part of me was relieved we were moving forward. Part of me was terrified of what came next. Filing for divorce made everything feel both real and final in a way that changing the locks and getting the restraining order hadn't. This was the official end of my marriage, documented in legal paperwork and court filings. Mark had 30 days to respond, and Eleanor expected him to fight over property division, despite the ironclad prenup. "People like him don't give up easily," she'd said, even when they know they have no legal ground to stand on. I spent that weekend going through wedding photos and cards. They were all in a box in my closet, untouched since our first anniversary. I sat on my bedroom floor, sifting through each photo, each card, each memento from a day that was supposed to be the start of our beautiful future. In the wedding photos, Mark looked so happy and I looked so hopeful. Chloe, beautiful in her maid of honor dress. We all looked like people who believed in the promises being made. I found Chloe's toast, handwritten, about how glad she was that her mom had finally found someone who made her smile again. Looking at all of it, with the knowledge I had now, felt like watching a different person's life. The future I'd imagined when I said "I do" had never existed outside my own hopeful imagination. The man I'd married wasn't who I thought he was. Maybe he'd hidden his true nature during our dating years. Or maybe I'd been so desperate for partnership that I'd ignored the signs that were there all along. Either way, the marriage I was mourning wasn't real. It was a story I'd told myself about who we were and what we could be. The actual marriage, the one where my husband slowly pushed my daughter out of her own home while I made excuses for him, that marriage deserved to end. I put the photos and cards back in the box and stored it in the garage. Maybe someday I'd be able to look at them without feeling this particular brand of sadness. For now, I needed to focus on moving forward. Something shifted in Chloe over the next few weeks. She started smiling again, those small moments of lightness that reminded me of who she'd been before Mark moved in. She brought friends home after school without asking permission first, just walked in with 2 girls from her volleyball team and headed straight to the kitchen for snacks. She played music in her room, loud enough that I could hear it downstairs, some pop song with a beat that made her door rattle. She sprawled on the living room couch doing homework, books spread across the cushions, feet up on the armrest. Little by little, she was reclaiming her space, her confidence. I watched her laugh at something on her phone one afternoon and realized I hadn't heard her laugh like that in months. The sound made my chest feel tight in a good way. We still had hard days, where she'd go quiet and withdrawn, where I could tell she was thinking about everything that had happened. But the good days were starting to outnumber the bad ones. She talked more at dinner, telling me stories about her teachers and friends, without that underlying anxiety that someone was going to tell her to be quiet. She asked if she could redecorate her room, and we spent a Saturday at the home improvement store, picking out new paint colors and bedding. She chose a light blue for the walls and white furniture to replace the dark wood set she'd had since middle school. We painted together over a long weekend, covering drop cloths, taping off trim, and getting more paint on ourselves than on the walls. Chloe put on a playlist, and we sang along badly while we worked. It felt like we were painting over more than just old wall color. We were covering up the last 2 years and starting fresh. Watching her reclaim her space and confidence made every difficult conversation and lost friendship worth it. We weren't all the way back to where we'd been before I met Mark, but we were heading in the right direction. The house felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted that I hadn't fully realized we were carrying. I started thinking about the early days of dating Mark, trying to pinpoint when I should have known better. The red flags had been there if I'd been willing to see them. Small comments about Chloe that I dismissed as adjustment struggles. Jokes about teenagers being expensive that I'd laughed off because I thought he was just being funny. The way he'd suggest activities that were just the two of us, framing it as important couple time, but really excluding Chloe from our plans. I'd been so grateful for adult companionship after years of single parenting that I'd minimized every concern. I'd made excuses for behavior that should have alarmed me. When he complained about Chloe being too loud, I told myself he just needed time to adjust. When he suggested she get a job at 15, I convinced myself he was trying to teach her responsibility. I'd reframed every red flag as a misunderstanding or a difference in parenting styles, rather than seeing the pattern of someone who resented my daughter's existence. Part of me wanted to beat myself up for being so blind, but my therapist helped me understand that recognizing manipulation didn't mean I was stupid for falling for it. She said people like Mark were skilled at presenting themselves as exactly what you needed. They said the right things and showed you the version of themselves that you wanted to see. The fact that I'd eventually recognized the truth and taken action was what mattered. I was learning to forgive myself for the mistake while still acknowledging the harm it caused Chloe. That balance was hard to find. Some days I felt okay about my choices, and other days I felt crushing guilt for not protecting her sooner. But I was working through it, trying to be gentler with myself while also holding space for the reality that my decisions had consequences. Understanding that I'd been manipulated didn't erase those consequences, but it helped me move forward without getting stuck in shame. 3 months after I changed the locks, Eleanor called with unexpected news. Mark's lawyer had contacted her to say they were accepting the divorce terms without contest. He wasn't going to fight over property division or try to claim any part of the house or my other assets. He just wanted the process over as quickly as possible. Eleanor was surprised. She'd expected him to drag things out for months. I asked what changed. She didn't know for sure, but suspected he'd finally talked to a lawyer who explained exactly how ironclad the prenup was. Whatever the reason, he'd given up. The divorce would be finalized in 60 days, ending a 2-year marriage that never should have happened. I felt relief more than sadness when Eleanor gave me the news. There was a small part of me that felt something like grief for the future I'd imagined, the dream that had never materialized. But mostly, I just felt ready to move on, ready to close this chapter and focus on rebuilding the peaceful home Chloe and I had before I'd complicated everything by getting married. Eleanor said she'd send over the final paperwork for me to review and sign. After that, it was just a matter of waiting for the court to process everything and issue the final decree. She congratulated me on getting through one of the hardest things a person could go through. I thanked her for all her help, telling her I couldn't have done it without her guidance. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a few minutes, just breathing. It was almost over. Soon, Mark would be officially out of our lives, and Chloe and I could truly start fresh. Chloe and I developed new routines over those last 2 months of waiting for the divorce to finalize. Sunday mornings became pancake time, where she'd request different mix-ins, and I'd try to accommodate whatever combination she came up with. We had chocolate chip and blueberry, and once she asked for peanut butter chips, which turned out better than expected. Friday nights were movie nights, where she picked the film and I supplied the popcorn and candy. She chose everything from old comedies I'd never heard of to horror movies that made me cover my eyes. We talked more openly now, about everything from school drama to college plans to boys she thought were cute. She told me about her friends and their problems and asked for advice on things she never would have brought up when Mark lived here. Our relationship wasn't magically perfect. We still had disagreements about curfew and homework and cleaning her room. But there was trust again, in a way there hadn't been for 2 years. She knew I would always choose her over anyone else. She knew this was her home, and nobody was going to push her out of it. We were learning to be a family of 2 again, and it felt right in a way that the family of 3 never had. The house was peaceful. Chloe was happy. I was healing. We were going to be okay. The divorce finalized on a Tuesday morning in late January. Eleanor called me at work to say the judge had signed the papers, and it was officially done. No dramatic courtroom scene or last-minute arguments, just signatures on legal documents that ended a 2-year marriage. I thanked her for everything she'd done to help me through the process. She said I'd done the hard part by standing up for myself and my daughter. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen for a few minutes, processing the fact that I was no longer married. The relief I felt was bigger than any sadness. That night, I picked Chloe up from school and told her we were going out to celebrate. She asked what we were celebrating, and I just smiled. Our fresh start, I told her. We went to her favorite Italian restaurant and ordered too much food. We talked about redecorating the living room now that we could truly make it feel like ours again. Chloe wanted to paint one wall a dark blue and hang string lights across the ceiling. We talked about planning a summer trip together, maybe driving up the coast, staying in little beach towns. Just the 2 of us, exploring and making new memories. Life wasn't perfect, and I was still stressed about money and dealing with some lingering hurt from everything that happened. But my daughter was happy and safe in her own home. That was everything that mattered to me. We were moving forward together as a family of 2. For the first time in 2 years, our house truly felt peaceful. What would you have done in my situation? And do you think my actions were justified or too extreme? Let me know in the comments below.